Hello there. Welcome to Nowhere to Hide. I'm Brian Hyde. Today we're going to be talking about doing right by the Idaho taxpayer. And some of this has to do with the property tax, which we're going to be talking about in some detail. It also has something to do with getting out and voting during those odd year elections like we saw yesterday. And I've got a great story to illustrate why it's a good idea to show up. Details are coming up.
All reporters are biased, the Idaho Press Club are biased, all media, newspaper, radio.
To be completely blunt here, Brian, and there are plans to expand
indoctrination.
That's right.
Idahoans are also concerned.
Horror shot. That line would be moving a little bit farther west.
I'm like crying.
Nobody wants to see
Dark money is influencing policy in our state.
Well, that's not how this works.
Once again, welcome to Nowhere to Hide. Taxes are going to be one of those things that will always be a point of contention for people who want the services and the structure and the stability that good government can provide, but at the same time don't want to feel like they're a sheep being fleeced every time that they turn around. So this is we're going to start with the idea of of course you showed up and you voted in your community yesterday, even though it was an odd year election, right? No, I know that voter turnout was as low as 8% in some of these voting districts. In others, there was some motivation, but I'm going to share with you a thought here. This is from the Idaho Freedom Action group, and this is how they were encouraging people to get out and vote. But I want you to listen to the reasoning here. It's easy to forget about or ignore those odd year elections, but it's vital to remember that local elections matter. In fact, I'm going to give you a great example of this in just a moment. True liberty is often decided right here in our communities. Things that determine the quality of our daily lives, such as what our children learn and who determines our property tax rates, those are the kind of things on the ballot. Every single vote counts in these races, so take time, get out and vote. That was the council yesterday, and there were people who took that counsel to heart. Now, you may have heard me talking last week about a certain farmer in the Valley School District in Jerome County who was questioned by the Secretary of State, actually received a letter threatening legal action from the Secretary of State, and it was on behalf of a school superintendent who had filed a complaint, allegedly as a private citizen, but on the school's telephone or the district's telephone, to complain that the campaign signs, which were against a supplemental levy that people voted on yesterday, that somehow they were illegal because they didn't say who they were paid for, who paid for them. Now, I hope to have the chance to interview Dean Diamond, who is that farmer, tomorrow. Actually, so Friday we should have an interview with him. I am really looking forward to hearing his side of the story. But I want you to see the outcome of that supplemental levy election in the Valley School District. This is small print, but against 280, in favor 276. 4 votes are what determined whether or not that levy would pass. It ultimately was defeated, but look at how close that margin is, and look at the lengths that certain people and individuals were ready to go to try to intimidate people one way or another from publicly expressing opinions, especially against it. And some of it was, a simple matter of, we're going to tell the kids you can't have field trips or you can't have any fun. No fun allowed at school because your parents didn't vote for the levy. But there were other more subtle hints, or at least subtle if you're a mafiosa, to, that's a nice business you have here. It'd be a shame if everybody in the community stopped coming here because you voted against the schools. All right. It's important that even if you don't feel like you're in the majority, if you feel like your principles are solid, you got to be willing to step up and represent them. And voting during those odd year elections is a good way to do it. Now, let's shift gears and talk about the property tax. I talked last week about getting rid of the grocery sales tax. We'll talk about the income tax at a later date, but Ron Nate, president of the Idaho Freedom Foundation, published this article on October 30th about a zero property tax would be a good look. Not just for Idaho, but everywhere. But since Idaho is where we're trying to wield our influence, let's talk about this. Ron says nose hair is offensive, and a tax on property is kind of like the nose hair of public policy. There may not be a more offensive tax, maybe a tax on breathable air, but hey, let's not give government any more ideas. So here are the 3 most nose hairish things about the property tax. First and foremost, it turns owners into renters. So let's say that you own your home. You paid it off after 30 years of mortgage payments. And then for some reason, you either refuse or you're unable to pay your property tax on it. Like one catastrophic illness could be the difference here, okay? What happens? Now, you know what happens. The longer you go without that tax paid, the closer the day comes when men with guns and badges will come, representing the real owner, to kick you out. Do you see the picture? The government will take your home. So the question here is, are you paying tax or rent? Ron says when failure to pay means a loss of ownership or seizure, in other words, then your tax really is just rent. People of a free country and a free state are endowed by God with the right to life, liberty, and property. Because taxation with the threat of seizure becomes a form of rent, well, then the right to property is abolished. And instead, it's more like an entitlement granted by the grace of government and revocable via a sufficiently onerous tax. The property tax abolishes the right to property. Something to think about there. Number two, property tax can also open the door to taxes on unrealized gains. Do you remember not so long ago a certain candidate for president suggested taxing the unrealized, in other words, not cashed in profits of holders of stock and other financial assets? In other words, it's the potential wealth that they could have if they were to sell off those assets, but they haven't sold them. So to extract money from people who are becoming wealthy but who haven't sold their assets in order to receive the profits of the higher values. Now, that candidate was roundly criticized for suggesting taxing ethereal, unrealized wealth. And few acknowledge that we already do the same thing with property taxes on home ownership. How? Well, property taxes are assessed on the current market value of the home. And higher home prices lead to higher taxes on those unrealized gains supposedly possible from selling off the home. Number three, everyone needs a home. Let's go back to those God-given rights. A property tax on a home replaces the right to life with a government-granted or revoked privilege to live. Government replaces God. We're endowed by our Creator with inalienable rights, among which life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, which is a fancy way of saying property. The right to life, to be effective, has to include the right to acquire and utilize the necessities of life, including food, clothing, shelter, etc. Now, removing or threatening the ability to acquire and keep any of these, like a home, is an affront to one's right to live and be free. Property taxes defy the rights of the people. Now, these are the problems, but let's talk solutions. Ron says eliminating the tax on property may be easier than you think. In fact, a couple of steps in the process are already in effect. And I don't know if you realize this. I'll show you a chart here in a moment. But did you know in the last 2 years, legislation was passed to ease property taxes? So House Bill 292 in 2023, House Bill 521 in 2024 utilized money from the state's general fund to reduce school district levies and provide direct tax relief to homeowners, totaling $560 million. Both of those bills reduced the burden on property owners by replacing some of the local taxes with state funding. And the point here is it can be done. That's the formula for eliminating property taxes in Idaho. You take the natural growth in sales and income taxes at the state level, and you allocate the money to local governments in lieu of their collecting that amount of property taxes. And within 6 to 7 years of these kinds of incremental replacements, the growth in sales taxes and income taxes will facilitate enough allocations to offset the entire amount of property taxes being paid for local government and school districts. So let's see what that looks like as far as a visualization. Look at the difference here in 2021 versus 2022 versus 2023 and 2024. Those last 2 years, people were actually paying less in net property taxes. It can be done. It just takes the willpower to do it. Ron asks, can you see how the state allocation reduced the net property taxes? Property owners paid less in property taxes in 2024 than they did in 2021. So if Idaho lawmakers make even greater efforts at cementing this as the plan, maybe $400 million per year dedicated to incremental property tax replacement, within 6 years, all property taxes could be abolished. All Idaho needs to do is continue to build on that process. Limit the growth in local government growth and spending, increase the allocations from the state to the local governments, and eventually get the net property taxes paid down to zero. That does sound doable. And you can finally eliminate all the property tax references in the state statutes. Presto. Idaho homeowners are owners again, and Idaho's led the way to become the first state with zero property taxes. Now, we're kind of in a bit of a neck-and-neck race. Florida is trying to do this as well. I would love to see us get it, maybe not just for the bragging rights, but for the fact that Idaho property owners deserve that break. Idaho taxpayers deserve that win. And when you see our interview with Dean Diamond, I hope you'll appreciate that some taxpayers take that citizenship seriously. And if the accounting on the money for that school district levy isn't quite right, or if they just flat out say, look, we have enough. We don't need to be spending more. I want to vote against more of my money being taken out of my pocket. Then that's why you have to show up. Remember, 4 votes made the difference. I'm Brian Hyde, and this is Nowhere to Hide.
All reporters are biased. The Idaho Press Club are biased. All media, newspaper, radio.
To be completely blunt here, Brian, and there are plans to expand
indoctrination.
That's right.
Idahoans are also concerned.
Horror shot. That line would be moving a little bit farther west.
I'm like crying.